Thank you so much. And it is clear that Pope Francis is writing an encyclical on the environment, which is the largest teaching statement for the Catholic community, which will affect 1.2 billion Catholics, but 2 billion Christians. And I am so delighted to see colleagues here, Arthur Waskow from the Jewish community, Fazlin Khalid from the Islamic community, representatives from the Buddhist communities, and so on, because this effort of all the religions is a huge moment for transformation, as we know. Our colleagues from Sweden, who have been at this for a long, long time, from Uppsala, one of the early statements on climate change and world religions. So there is hope. And in doing this work for 25 years, I think this is one of the most hopeful signs of the religions really getting on board with scientists, with people in the policy communities, with people in environmental groups. So with that sense of hope, which is also deeply needed in our times, as Jim Antal and others have pointed out, working with the UCC community to be the first to actually divest. Let's give it up for UCC. and Jim's efforts in that regard. And I could name so many others, our wonderful student Stephanie Johnson in the Episcopal community. It's really encouraging, and that's what I want us to feel, the uplift of scientists who've been at this for such a long time, including Tom and Vandana. And we are coming together with new voices on this issue. It's quite remarkable. I really want to draw that into our minds, our hearts, our bodies for this march tomorrow. It's a moment of change. And before we open it up, let's also thank, once again, Karenna Gore for pulling this together. Thank you, Karenna. Okay, I could go on with this forever, because gratitude is what grounds us. You know, it really moves us forward with energy and gratitude for this earth. So I'd like to begin, if I can, and you're all mic'd, so you can sit there. But Tom, today's New York Times opinion page had quite an editorial from one of our forestry school colleagues, Nadine Unger, on the issue of forests and deforestation and planting of trees and the carbon that is sequestered or not from that process. It's going to be an opinion piece that's going to get a lot of attention, for better or for worse, but especially because she references the Amazon in this article, and she's suggesting planting trees is not necessarily the best way to deal with climate change. So we'd love you to respond to that opinion page article, if you don't mind.
So to begin with,
can everyone hear? Is your mic on? Mic's on?
Is it on now?
Yeah, just be
okay.
flattering.
So to begin with, yes, it actually is true. You can't solve climate change by just planting trees, because it's such a big problem. You actually have. So.
Louder. Yeah, that's
louder.
a good idea.
Let me try that.
Thank you.
Is this better?
Yes.
Great. So to start with, it is true that you can't solve the climate issue just with trees and forests and ecosystems, because it's so big. We cannot ignore dealing with the fossil fuel challenge. But that said, however, there are only a couple points in that op-ed which actually were correct. And it's the kind of thing that occasionally happens when somebody is basically a physical scientist, tries to write about big ecological systems. And basically, she got it wrong. Because I already gave you the figures of what you can do. It's quite staggering what you can do by restoring global ecosystems. So I think it will be a bit of a squall for a while, but it will go away because it just doesn't stand up ecologically. It basically said that planting trees, well, I think you ought to go read it, yeah. But it said it really doesn't make any difference to plant trees as a contribution to avoiding climate change. And so, you know, I think the really important thing here is actually twice in the history of life on Earth, there have been extremely high CO2 levels brought down to pre-industrial levels by mostly biological processes. And the first time that happened was when plants first appeared on the dry land, for example. And in both those instances, it worked, but it took tens of millions of years. Right? We don't have that luxury. But since a lot of the ecosystem destruction and degradation, in fact, almost all of it is our own doing, we're quite capable of undoing some of that and regaining not only the climate benefit, but all the ancillary benefits that I talked about earlier.
Thank you. Vandana, you mentioned at the end Rita and this sense from the Hindu tradition of what can be brought forward. You've mentioned in other writings Shakti and that sense of the life force, and back to your early work with Chipko and so on. Could you just mention a few of some of the key ideas we can draw forward in the way you already are in your work, right relations and your award in that regard, but Rita, Shakti, however you want to go forward.
I think the first most important thing that we need to bring forward is that we are part of the amazing energy of this universe. That's what Shakti means. And we've reduced the understanding of energy to the fossil fuel interpretation. That's something you burn, something that you put into a car to drive, something that comes through wires to give you electricity or amplification. No, that's a very small aspect of energy. And it is in fact consumer energy. You consume that kind of energy. Whereas Shakti is regenerative energy, where you release energy. And when you take this into deeper levels, and I think that's going to be the kind of debate, whether it's about regenerating soils or ecosystems that are really, renewing the earth, that we'll have to go beyond Newtonian classical mechanics. Too much of thinking is about fixed amounts of mass, fixed immutable balls, and we go crazy. Because when we think of this much ppm, and that's all we are thinking of, and we're not thinking of all the ecological possibilities available on the planet, including our own work, we won't even start to begin taking the right action. We can actually go into fear. Because if you only look at the stratosphere, then it's something we can't change. But you look at the soil, you can add that much more living organic matter and create humus. You look at the seed, you can actually turn every rooftop, every balcony, every piece of land. I saw protests yesterday downtown where mothers are coming out with children saying this should be a park, not a parking lot. And I think that's action that can take place everywhere. I think the very big change needed is the way we've defined human work. We reduce human work for the coal economy to labor, an input that's bought and sold. Human work is the ultimate creative expression of us as creative and responsible beings. And whether it's climate change or unemployment or crime or whatever violence against women, it's related to defining human beings out of the creative matrix. And we've got to define them in again.
Yes, thank you
good.
so much. One of the things that Vandana said in a recent blog that I'll leave on the background for the moment, but that her whole life has been dedicated to the service of the earth. And one of the things I admire about all these people up here, and many of you, is the saying that comes from the Karma Phala, comes from the Bhagavad Gita, the Karma Phala, that we let go of the fruits of our actions. in service to the long term, in service to what we don't know. And that is what each of these individuals have done. The giving forward of action, of words, of deeds, not knowing with an uncertain future. Tremendous admiration for this service for the earth. And that brings me, of course, to Edwin. And I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit more out of your tradition, out of the Catholic tradition. What forces from Catholic social teaching or forces of the sense of the sacredness of the earth that have motivated you in your extraordinary action to stop mining in particular?
Before going to that, I think I'd like to go back to one of the insights that we had yesterday, that we need to detoxify our tradition. And Christianity, or Catholicism for that matter, had been guilty of being too anthropocentric. That's the wrong interpretation of the Genesis passage of being of human being taking dominion of the world to being stewards of the earth. So I think that the stewardship concept, the right concept of stewardship, is the one propelling me to really take on this challenge of taking care of the environment. And this is very predominant concept also in the thinking of the present Pope, that we are stewards of the earth, that we need to protect the earth, that without doing that, we destroy creation. And also, it's a matter of justice, as I have already shared. The poor and the most vulnerable, that had nothing to do with increasing the climate risk, are the victims of climate change. So, but this is not only about the poor people and the vulnerable, but also intergenerational justice. The social teachings of the Church, many of the passages, even in the compendium, emphasize this notion of intergenerational justice also for the next generation, benefiting for the fruit of the earth. And many other tenets of the faith, like common good, and also how do we protect and serve the poor, the poorest of the poor, actually.
Thank you. Maybe to, thank you, yes. Maybe to conclude, we can ask the hard question that is, I think, in our minds and hearts and souls. And how do we speak forward towards hope? What is it that gives each of you a sense, and we can talk about hope and optimism and all this, but without going into parsing the words, apart from UN negotiations, apart from the frustration of political processes, what is it that rests in a community like this that gives us hope? And I'll just begin by referencing Thomas Berry's extraordinary conclusion of The New Story, which says, I can't even paraphrase it, but if the universe brought forth the galaxies and stars and planetary systems, and if over 14 billion years a life-generating planet emerged, and if over 2 billion years the first cell emerged, and if over 4.6 billion years this diversity of life emerged, we have reason for hope that humans can align themselves with this great creative process and move forward for life and the life-generating systems of this planet. That's what gives me hope. But I'd love to have Tom, Vandana, whoever wants to begin this, just a short statement of what gives you hope in these hard times.
Well,
Tom?
thanks. So I guess one of the things I would say is that never does a day go by without my discovering something new and wonderful that's being done in the right kind of direction. And sometimes in surprising places. And so I often get this question, are you a pessimist or an optimist? And optimism is the only option, right? It's the only option.
seed giving rise to thousands of seeds is a daily miracle of hope. Seeing all those soil organisms which our eyes don't see, but now with microscopes we can recognize. The mycorrhizal fungi that goes out meters and meters to pick up that little bit of potassium to help the plant. What gives me hope is that on our little farm, just doing the right thing for the seed, we've created a habitat for 6 times more pollinators than in the forests next door, which are a protected area. And what gives me great hope is in these times of overall pessimism, in these times of huge, illegitimate, undemocratic control over every process, whether it be economics or politics or media, hundreds of thousands will gather tomorrow and march in a very self-organized way. There's no one mastermind. Everyone is feeling the need to come together like the 50 trillion cells in our bodies come together to create the miracle that we are. And the day humanity overall recognizes that we are part of one earth community, we are one part of one humanity, that's when that huge energy will be released. And I have a lot of hope that that's going to happen.
Thank you.
Similarly, like what you said, I'm part of the social movement in the Philippines. And what gives me hope is really this energy of people coming together to really struggle for the environment, for the right of the poor. And this really what drives me to continue on what we have been doing.
Thank you. I also have to say, what gives me hope is John Grimm, my partner, and what a great guy. And thank goodness for him. But I also want to say there's so many communities across the planet, and I just want to raise one up that has given me joy and hope for so many years, because it's kept alive the vision of Thomas Berry on the ground for 35 years, and that is Genesis Farm in the Delaware Water Gap with the faithful, incredible voices of Miriam McGillis. Thank you. So, our ancestors are with us. That's the point, aren't they? Again, thank you to this extraordinary panel, to the work they do, the energy they bring to it, and may our day go forward with this hope and this energy. Thank you again to our panelists.
Great.